So if anybody else wants to introduce him or herself, feel free to do so. Name, school, background, work, interests. Before we start, please feel free to do it. Feel free to do it.
So perhaps I can quickly introduce myself to everyone. My name is Michele, and I work with UN Women, as I think you've seen from the invitation. I've been here for almost a year now. I joined a couple of months, spring last year, and then permanently from August 2019. I've been working with the UN for a little bit more than 20 years now, 22 or 23. And in many countries, before coming to Albania, I was for about 6 years with UN Women in New York. I'm from Italy, so on the other side of the coast. And needless to say, extremely happy and excited to be in Albania.
Thank you. It's good to
Thank you. Okay.
Well, I believe that most of the people have joined. In the meanwhile, we can begin with the introduction of the event and the presentation. And in the meanwhile, I believe that the last group will join.
So, are we live streaming now? Shall we start?
Yes, we're good now.
Okay. Okay, great. So I'm starting. Dear participants, dear Mr. Ribotta, and dear friends who are following us from Facebook, welcome. My name is Sabina Giurceni, and as part of United Nations Youth Association Albania, together with my colleague friends Daniel and Luca, we have organized this event. First, I want to say how happy it makes me see all of you here on a summer Friday afternoon, committed to discuss a topic that is very important, sensitive, as well as close to our hearts. So, generation equality. It is the UN Women Initiative to bring together the next generation of women's rights activists and the gender equality advocates who are actually instrumental in creating the Beijing Platform for Action. This year actually will be 25 years since the Beijing Platform for Action, set out how to remove the systemic barriers and hold women back from equal participation in all areas of life, whether in public or in private sphere. Despite some progress, real change has been slow for the majority of women and girls in the world. Today, not a single country can actually claim to have achieved gender equality because multiple obstacles remain unchanged in law and in culture. For these and many more reasons, we are gathered here today to share our thoughts and opinions regarding the matter. I would like to make it clear that this is a friendly and a very relaxed discussion, and you shall feel free to speak your mind. So, interestingly enough, the idea of UN75 Dialogue is actually related to this. It is to give the young people from all over the world the opportunity to express their ideas on not only what are the issues that the world is facing nowadays, but also to hear solutions and why not suggest solutions. That being said, this discussion will also officially will be registered in the UN75 platform which means that every opinion and suggestion that you guys express here will be sent to the UN headquarters to be gathered and processed with our data from similar activities in order to become part of the report that will be handed over to the heads of states and governments on the 21st of September, where they will discuss and approve a political declaration on the future that we want. So very quickly, I'm going to give some details regarding the format of this coffee talk. The discussion will be focused in 3 main subtopics. It will be gender mainstreaming, gender and development, and men and gender. We will have around 20 minutes to talk regarding each subtopic, and due to the limited time, I would kindly ask everyone to keep their thoughts like within 2 or 3 minutes. So without losing any more time, I want to thank and welcome our very special guest, Mr. Michele Ribotta, which is the UN Women representative to Albania. Mr. Ribotta, the floor is yours.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Okay, Sabina, Luca, Daniel, and Christy, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here with so many of you. Actually, Sabina, you stole every single word that I wanted to use as a way of introduction, so I don't know what to say anymore. I guess I can just add, sort of building on your initial sort of words, a few things. I am really excited about this initiative and how this is going to fit into the global conversation about 75 years of the United Nations. And as you rightly said, I mean, 2020 is really such an important year when it comes to you know, key issues related to the way that countries work together, to international relations. Not only we are marking 75 years of the UN existence, we're marking 25 years of one of the landmark global conferences, as you have pointed out, in Beijing. We are, in terms of UN Women, we're also marking other important anniversaries, such as, for example, 20 years since the time that the Security Council for the first time passed a resolution on the role of women in peace and security, in conflict resolution, in conflict management. Last but not least, the UN Women in about a little more than 10 days is turning 10 years old. So we have, I think that we have, I don't know if we have much to celebrate. We have certainly a little bit to celebrate, but I think it's also a moment for us to reflect in terms of, you know, what has been, how this new, relatively new entity, perhaps I think still the newest in the United Nations universe, has been able to really catalyze attention and action in the critical areas of gender equality. I was reading such an interesting article that I'll be very happy to pass on to you the other day, that it kind of analyzing the what is, let's say, the changed environment in which we are marking now today the 25 years from the Beijing Global Conferences, and how much the world has changed in the past 25 years, and in many respects when it comes to the sort of women's rights agenda, not for the better. Including with respect to the overall, let's say, environment of cooperation, international cooperation, that in a way, right after the downfall of the Berlin Wall in 1995 was much more conducive at the time for a renewed spirit of international cooperation. So we have a lot of challenges nowadays that we have to confront in terms of making sure that we can use the United Nations as the most universal intergovernmental platform as a way to move forward. As you probably, and this is of course one of the issues that I am mostly looking forward to kind of interact and discuss with you, as you I'm sure you will have seen, there are many trends that are somehow threatening to actually not only not move forward, but in a way kind of reverse the various gains in terms of international standards, in terms of human rights that have been achieved over the past decades. So I think it's for me really as a way of introduction. I just wanted to say that I hope I can listen more than talk to you, in the sense that to me this is a hugely important learning experience. I mean, what I like about the let's say the slogan of this 25 years campaign is this generational qualities. I really love these two words together. If you look at them together and if you look at them individually, the whole notion of trying to see what is it that it takes to make sure that we can achieve equality between men and women in this generation, but also what it means in terms of intergenerational dialogue. I mean, we basically had our mothers and fathers who fought for this platform. At the time, I suspect many of you were either not born or just born. I had just graduated from university, and I was in a completely, state of mind. I was a young university graduate with no family responsibilities, with no parenting responsibilities, still trying to find my place in society and in the world. And now, 25 years afterwards, not only I'm a UN worker, but also I can see on a daily basis what does it mean to really live and practice the challenges of, let's say, a feminist agenda. What does it mean to be a father of 3 young boys? And so there is so much to discuss about the generational equality agenda that I'm really thrilled to this opportunity. So I guess I will leave it there as a matter of introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Ribotta, for your opening remarks. It really sets the tone for the rest of the discussion, as you say. And we would like now to go into the roundtable discussion and introduce the first subtopic. As you are aware, the first subtopic will be gender mainstreaming, and a brief introduction. So as Mr. Ribotta says, gender equality is a challenge and an issue which is of high importance and which has been tackling all over the world with high intensity, now more than ever, considering also the landmark of the 25 years of the Beijing platform. However, any social achievement towards gender equality, any progress on this social conscience, on the conscience of society, on the role of women, needs to be reflected on institutional and policy terms, meaning that each public instrument needs to ensure gender sensitivity and gender responsiveness of the institution, of the national institutions, and the inclusion of women perspectives in policy making. From what we have gathered from the responses in the application form, we notice that there is no clear consensus on whether gender mainstreaming should be a component of public policies. Many have opted for public policies of a gender-neutral character and provided their fairly well substantiated arguments. While the other side of the argument is that even though public policies are designed neutrally and equally for everyone, in fact, they produce different effects for men and women, sometimes due to underlying causes of discrimination. So in order to mitigate this, some argue that positive discrimination should be an element of public policies. I think that this is a very interesting topic and everybody has its take on this, so I believe it will generate quite a few insightful remarks. Before we move on to the discussion, just a few brief instructions on the Zoom. If anybody has any remark to say, please use the raise hand options, which you can find at the participants section. So at the bottom line of your screen, you have a few sections. The participants one, if you click on the participants one, you will find an option on the bottom right screen which says raise hand. We will notice you and you can speak and then you can speak. If this is If you have any inconvenience with this, you can just drop a comment on the chat section saying that you have something to say, and we can proceed. So without further ado, if anyone wants to take the floor and share their opinions with us and Mr. Ribotta, you are welcome to do so.
So you want me to say a couple of things at the beginning, or how do you want to run it?
Yes, please. If you have a few opening remarks for the gender mainstreaming.
Okay, I think you kind of framed the conversations around gender mainstreaming already very well, and there are a number of key questions that I'm really curious also to see what you think about. And by the way, I think that we can have a kind of a to an extent also free-flowing conversations. I think the first two subtopics, gender mainstreaming and gender and development, are really kind of two sides of the same coin. There is a lot of, let's say, interlinkages and mutual relationships between these two concepts. But I mean, going back again to the 1995 in Beijing, I think the revolutionary idea that took place, that was materialized in Beijing, was really to try and have an agenda that really commit all members, all countries in the world. That was, by the way, shaped largely with the active participations of thousands of women coming from all walks of life, all cultures, all countries, all groups, was to really fundamentally let's say, reshape the agenda of development that is based through the full and equal participation of men and women as really agents and beneficiaries of sustainable development. I think so in a way, it's funny because, when the first thing I've done, although we kind of deal with gender mainstreaming on a daily basis in preparing for these conversations, I went to see the dictionary definitions of mainstreaming. And I don't know about Albanian language, but I know that mainstreaming is a word that doesn't translate very well in many languages. For example, in my language, there is not an actual immediate translation for mainstreaming. Perhaps the closest translation of mainstreaming is something like to integrate, but doesn't really necessarily kind of give the idea of the meaning of mainstreaming. I think fundamentally the premise of Beijing was that we live in a world which is characterized by structural inequalities that affects women's life in all aspects of their livelihoods. So the mainstreaming was very much practically defined by the Beijing agenda. For example, on one hand, by identifying specifically all of the areas where it was understood that those structural inequalities were negatively affecting women's life. So we're speaking about issues such as poverty, we're speaking about issues such as education, health, the world of work, conflict, the economy, the power relations, the media, the environment. So that all aspects of people's life are affected and shaped by these structural inequalities. So that is one of the key aspects of how can we come up with an agenda through which we can look at all of these development sectors, if you may prefer to call them, through the lenses of the discrimination, the persisting discrimination, whether they are in law, whether they are in practice. So, and then the mainstreaming comes in more as a means to an end, as a strategy, rather than the actual ultimate goal. So the ultimate goal of Beijing as a political sort of normative platform is to actually achieve equality, achieve a society whereby there is full participation on completely equal footing from half of the world population. The strategy through which this is supposed to be achieved in the proposition of Beijing is through gender mainstreaming, which means, for example, being able across all of these sectors to understand what those differences are, to understand what those elements, how those elements of discriminations are actually affecting people's lives, to be able to turn those differences into actions, and to be able to monitor and measure, how people are actually, and how organizations are equipped to address those, let's say, those differences that are inherent to our organizations, to the work and life of organizations and of individuals and groups. So I guess perhaps as an initial, let's say, additional input from my side, I would basically share this couple of ideas.
Great, thank you, Mr. Ribotta. So now we will open the floor to the participants. Anyone that has something to say, an opinion to share with us is most welcome on this topic, or any other thing that you think is of interest to be discussed in this. So we have an intervention. Okay, so yes, Arsil.
Hey, hello everyone. It's a pleasure being here with all of you, and especially at this very moment for Albania, where we're having this topic is almost gaining a momentum. Let's say, from a social gathering, was a social movement that was very genuine. Actually, to me, it made me feel good as part of the youth in Albania. Okay, it was not entirely perceived as part of a gender equality movement, but also it was also for children protection. But it was the first step and the first motive to start with. This is a very interesting topic to me. I am very much keen to it, but I would like to talk about, just briefly, turn the focus on the fact of the rhetorics about gender equality. Okay, it's very easy for this generation to notice or to be a bit disturbed from probably TV media shows where gender equality had a different approach, and I'm talking about even popular TV series and stuff like that. But what we are, while we are having a better approach in the sense of media and the TV shows and all that, where they have a more political correct and more awareness about this issue, we are noticing that the rhetorics have changed in the level of the politicians. And I believe that could also interfere with the policy making instruments and the whole environment to talk about this issue. And I think we all have someone in mind when I'm talking about politicians with a severe rhetoric about many social issues. And unfortunately, it's a wave that it's almost everywhere in the world. So that would be a concern of mine that I don't think we talk enough about, but altogether make it somewhat difficult, all the narrative about gender equality. This would be my opening, but if if someone has something, I would like to keep it up a bit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Arsit. Thank you for your comment. And now we move on to Fiona. Fiona, if you will.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I wanted to say that I want to start by seeing the whole matter in a positive light. We have made a lot of progress in the last decades regarding to gender equality. I have worked with child rights actually for quite a long time, and I kind of have read a lot of reports on how children are educated to know about child rights and human rights. Years ago, when the concept of human rights just started being used in Albania, what was seen is that the opinion about them, and still in a lot of areas today as where we live, is that respecting gender equality means that you have a good life with your partner when there is no domestic violence, etc. And people forget, and they don't actually forget, they just don't have the education that is related to human rights, child rights, and gender rights. One report that I read a long time ago said that 97% of young people in Albania have heard about human rights, even though they don't have a proper education related to them. And 89% of this was children and young people that had heard about human rights in school. The curricula that supports this kind of matters is poor. So one of the things that we should most advocate for is creating a new curricula where human rights are a part of this. By investing on this, we might bring a change into the system. It is sad to see that even nowadays a lot of things are happening, child abuse, sexual harassment in different institutions. But I believe that if young people invest in changing the mentality, it is a simple thing to change. I would say simple, but it is not quite correct because in my work, I have seen that people are waiting for change to come from government. Well, but actually this is something that should come from the people. And it is in our hand as young people to stand up and speak for gender equality and even teach to older generations and change their opinions about things that should be done and should not be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona, for your comment. And I see that Joanna has a comment as well. Joanna, if you will.
Yes, I just want to say thank you, and I want to like build off of what Fiona was saying, that the curriculum is very weak and the stuff that we learn in school is not very valuable, or even we can't even use it in everyday life. Like we don't get depictions of what is happening and we don't get a real explanation. We just are given these facts and they say just like, these are your basic human rights and then you should accept them. And of course that we should accept them, but we should go into more to what they mean to us, what happened before that people were getting discriminated. So these things even have to get implemented for people to know them. And I think that from the previous speaker before Fiona, I think that like it is very important to implement, like I wouldn't say just like for them being politically correct, but just having these issues like in TV shows and movies and stuff like that, and even books, but like especially movies and TV shows where there is such a young audience, and even for older generations where if they haven't seen something before, they're faced with it through this media encounter, and they can see the issue and they can see how it might affect someone or something like that if they don't have the opportunity to see that in real life. And I just think that it's really important that if we don't have this in school, I think that's a very good thing that media is doing this coverage. Well, not media, but I mean TV shows and movies. I think it's a really important part to implement and to show that not only women's rights and gender equality, but many rights like human rights and children's rights. And I think that's very important.
Okay, thank you, Joanna, for your comment. I see that we have Mario and Anya waiting to say something, but in order to not overwhelm this, I would like to go back to Mr. Michele Ribotta, if he would like to comment on the opinions that have been said so far. So far they have we have comments that they have seen it on an education spectrum, is an education matter, and how it is perceived in the media and society generally. Mr. Ribotta, if you will.
Sure, thank you, Daniel. Lots of super interesting points. Are still fully agree on the idea of we have to really gain. You have to. I would say really take advantage of the momentum that those recent horrific cases of violence and abuse against adolescents and children. And the sort of nationwide indignations that they have sparked, this is obviously horrible, but I think there is, if we can say so, there is one, let's say, possible hope out of this, which is looking at the reaction that took place to that. I mean, I actually was at the rally the other day, and it was really, really encouraging to see so many people, so many young people, also so many people across generations, so many men, so many boys. I really got emotional when at one point I saw she must have been 10 or 11 years old, walking hand by hand with her grandmother and chanting out loud, "You're not alone." I mean, I think there is a lot of hope that is coming from this, what remain horrific cases. I do agree with Fiona that there is definitely a lot of progress. There is I mean, whichever way you look at it globally, regionally, country by country in Albania, there is undoubtedly a lot of progress that has been made. We have, as a team of, let's say, UN offices in Albania, following these tragic events the other day, we have written together a kind of a op-ed, a long piece that we have tried to circulate in the media, and we have kind of identified 3 or 4 key areas which we think are really, really crucial in terms of the way forward. And we have indeed confirmed what we're saying, that yes, there has been a lot of progress. I think in Albania, especially, there's been a lot of progress in terms of trying to bring all of the legal framework across the board more in line with the international human rights standards, international human rights commitments that the country has adhered to. Where we see that there is still a lot of work to do is to actually make sure that those institutions that are accountable, that are supposed to be accountable for implementing those laws, you know, we need to have leadership step up to take responsibility for implementing those laws and those legal commitments at all levels. We're speaking about national government, we speak about the community level. Also, yes, legal framework can be, over time, can always be further improved. We are aware of the fact that when it comes to specifically protection of women, there are still some gaps in laws, but I think that we cannot be misguided by the fact that by and large, Albania enjoys today a fairly good legal framework for advancing the rights of women and girls. So what is really needed today is to actually make sure that those legal, let's say, provisions are implemented and they are resourced, and so that all of the various responsible institutions are identified by the laws, that actually they are equipped, their staff and their resource to actually be able to do their job. And then the other thing that we are really, it's funny because you mentioned the media, Joanna, and role of the media is critical as a positive vehicle for changing, for promoting this change of mindset that Fiona was referring to. But it is also true that the media can have a very negative effect on the way in which these issues are covered, the way in which the old notion of societal value, patriarchy are still a lot of perpetuated in the public image, but also when it comes to protecting the victims and those that are more at risk of, so all of the issue of privacy, et cetera, et cetera. And the education is one of the other areas, and the whole kind of societal engagement is one of the other areas that we clearly identify as key. I mean, these things can only be eliminated, these crimes can only be eliminated once and for all if there is really a renewed effort that cuts across all aspects of society, starting, as you has rightly said, from the educational institutions. The educational institutions are key, and I'm sure when we perhaps dig into a little bit more also the sub-topic of engaging men and boys when it comes to gender equality, perhaps we can talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ribotta. I would like to pass on the floor again to the participants. And I see that Mario has something to say. Mario, if you will.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, perfect. So to address what was said beforehand, I mean, it was said that education should play a greater role towards these matters, and I don't think that would really help because I'm like 23 years old now, and I remember that when I was like 6, this was being taught in schools. Rights, which to me, I mean, I remember the first time that I saw basic human rights, it was the right to have a name, and that to me sounded just absurd, but that it is an issue, you know, it's a real issue, and that's why we have these kind of lessons, you know, and it's still being taught today that those same basic human rights, and analyzing the situation 15 years ago and today, those same basic rights, you know, have done a lot more. Speaking about the rally that happened, I was there, And something that shocked me, I would say, was that two women, older women, asked me if it was a political protest. They didn't know what was going on, and that shocked me. Let's put it this way. And yet you had all these young people rallying for what was unjust. And to add to what Michele said is that sanctioning, that should be the main focus. I think that's how you can change people's perception and raise awareness towards it, through sanctioning. We've seen it. And to draw a parallel is that I would say that I remember that we've been taught road ethics, let's say, or like how to abide to road rules, when to cross the road, when not to cross the road, and that always has been an issue until the sanction started happening. Basically, the penalties were raised, and people started taking it more seriously. And in a way, we like it or not, it's fear that's going to make us better, basically. Yeah, that's it. I bide my time.
Okay, thank you, Mario, for your comment. Now we'll move on to Anya. I see Anya has a point. Anya, if you want.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, it's perfect.
Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone. I am Anya, but I'm not going to present myself because whatever. What I meant to say was gender equality is such an important issue because it is underlined in like different spheres of society, like economical, political, societal. And as a girl living in Albania, I know that I'm gonna, get that I'm very vulnerable towards the policies here, because especially here we have such a like rigid patriarchal society, and whether we like it or not, whether we say that like the laws are not like are neutral, these laws are functioning in a patriarchal society. So they're gonna have this underlying moments of like they're gonna be more profiting to like certain groups of people that profit more from like this patriarchal values. What I was also going to say, to add from what Mario and Mr. Michele said, is that we in Albania, we are very afraid of making things political, because there has been something in us that we have been programmed to think that whatever is political is bad. And that's why I think so many of our protests, so many of our rallies fail, because we don't want to make them political, even though making them political is the most important thing we can do. And I think this lies in the fact that we so deeply entrust the government or the way that it functions. But personally, I believe that we should not just advocate like that one rally. We should advocate every day. And what I've also seen is the fact that what I've also witnessed is also the fact that the moment that gender equality takes like another name, for example, like feminism, it's very like deeply entrusted here in Albania. So I think we should also try to mention that and discuss that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya. It was really interesting. And now I see that Ina has a point to make. Ina, if you will. I believe that you can unmute yourself if you have.
Okay,
yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect, thanks.
Yes, thank you. I want to express my opinion briefly about gender equality. This is a daily issue that we face in our everyday life. And I agree that the approach should be institutional, that everything should be integrated in the policy, but also it should be target, because gender equality is a global topic, but we don't have a common denominator. Because when we talk, for example, in Albania, or if we talk in United States or in India, we talk about the same goal, but we should take in consideration different factors that affect the society there. And one of them, for example, is the culture. which is very difficult to change throughout the years. And I think that it most depends on people, that they should think, they should change the way how they think. And when we combine government and the society together, maybe we can push more toward this change of the culture. Also, taking the case of Albania, I would say, in my opinion at least, that we should not only educate females, but we also should educate males. We should include them, and they should be part of the strategy because they are the group which we are vulnerable towards. So in order to be more efficient, I guess that we should educate them both, not only females, because we talk for females' rights and inequality, and we forget to include and to educate them as well.
Thank you, Ina.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. Ribotta, in order, again, to not overwhelm with the comments, I would like to go back to you on the thoughts of our participants, on the fact that Mario suggested maybe a punitive approach, not a reformative approach, should be emphasized, or if the lack of political engagement and the distrust in institutional norms can sometimes make it difficult for these practices, public policies, to succeed and have public support.
Okay, excellent interventions and very difficult questions and issues to address. I think in a way, many of the examples that you just provided, in terms of the punitive versus the preventive or education approaches, or whether, we should focus on women and girls versus men and boys, or both. I think in a way, these are also examples of how gender equality, in order to be achieved, requires a mainstreaming approach. I think you are illustrating in your own words and with your own ideas the notion that there is not necessarily one single strategy, one single approach through which you can actually, guarantee and realize the full extent of women's rights. It just doesn't happen that way. By the way, one comment on the I heard a couple of times the gender neutral reference to gender neutral laws or policies. It's again very interesting. I think we have to be a little bit careful. The gender neutral policies, if we understand them, has to say, well, look, if we don't start touching men and women, then we do no harm, because we are not discriminating in any way against any group, and therefore this is good. Well, I think we are a little bit missing the point, and the point being that the policies and laws should actually have an understanding of what is the actual existing reality that they want to shape, affect, and possibly change. So this is why, by the way, evidence-based and data is such a key and huge important factor of gender mainstreaming, and such a key and important factor of being sure that those that you can base on data and evidence whether or not the policy should be neutral or specifically gender responsive. The sad reality is that much more often than not, the sectors and the issues and the challenges, the policies and laws are supposed to address and fix are not gender neutral. That we can see in many aspects of life that women are actually left behind versus men for a number of reasons. And so if that is the situation, you cannot hope to actually redress that level of inequality without having some sort of targeted and preferential approaches that are supposed to bring those that are left behind in equal terms with other groups. So that's one thing that I wanted to sort of comment and highlight.
Thank you, Mr. Ribotta. So, in order to widen the discussion,
sorry, perhaps one
yes.
one comment on the punitive that you asked me to comment on the punitive. Let's say very difficult conversation, and I do understand and appreciate that, especially you know, in front of such horrible crimes, horrible crimes. The instinct may be to say, well, you know, put them in jail and throw the key. Now, I think that by the way, the recent cases are, entre guillemets, interesting because they actually present us, they actually show us how complex the phenomenon of abuse and violence is. I mean, we have cases of, look only at, we have a case of a perpetrator which is, if I remember well, over 65, around 70. And then we have cases of also other perpetrators that are much younger than you are. So I think that this poses an enormous challenge in terms of what do you do and how do you actually respond to those different kind of, let's say, groups of people that are still equally committing crimes. But one difference is that you have on one hand a person who is a senior individual over 65, which with probably a past legacy and track record of crime and abuse, both as a perpetrator, possibly as a victim as well, you never know, for which it may, in terms of the policy and legal response, the priority may have to be making sure that that person is not put in a position to continue to harm others. Then you have another situation whereby, of course, there are still perpetrators that have committed crimes and they should pay for the crimes they commit, but we are speaking about young individuals of 18, 16, 18, 20 years old who have a whole life in front of them. To me, thinking that the only way in which you can somehow help them understand what they have done and avoid that they can actually do this in the future only by a punishment approach, I am not sure that this is actually necessarily an effective approach. So this is why I think it is important to also complement, you know, different approaches that also imply working with perpetrators so that they can actually get the psychological, medical and psychological support that they may be needing in order to understand and to kind of dig deeper into the crimes and the mistakes that they commit in order to not sort of, you know, perpetuate those in the future. And a very, very difficult, complex conversations, I think, and I agree that the instinct may be one of just punishment, but I think that we have to also consider this from a perspective of effectiveness and sustainability over time.
Thank you, Mr. Ribotta. So taking from the preventive side of the argument, I think we can move on to the next subtopic in order to widen the discussion. However, I see that we have a few people who want to comment. By no means the next subtopic is unrelated. It's totally related. As Mr. Ribotta said, there are two sides of the same coin. And I would like to pass it to Sabina for her introduction of the subtopic, then we can move it back to the floor.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everyone, for the great insights during this first subtopic. As Mr. Ribotta mentioned it in the beginning, there is a very close relationship between gender mainstreaming and gender and development. Shortly, this subtopic aims to elaborate on the interplay between gender and development. And we will be focused this time on the effect that it has on social and economic development mostly. Also, we'll be looking into why and how gender is an essential element in promoting long-term, inclusive and sustainable development. Also, how it can bring into further development of the country. I'm gonna bring here with you some perspectives of you during your applications, and regarding the question on if gender equality, according to you, is a catalyst for the overall economic development, 99%, the majority of you, expressed positive regarding this, and they believe that progress in gender equality triggers positive multipliers effects across the spectrum of development, because according to you, women are an important part of labor workforce, which means that and they make the half of the population. And if half of the workforce is involved in the economic life, then it will bring further development. Also, you tackled the issue of gender preferred jobs and how they lower the competition and therefore the quality. The gender and development, like the gender equality, brings serious and brings to a more sustainable economic model. Apart from that, apart from the economic approach, some of you also highlighted the facts that gender equality brings also political developments, as in increasing the democratic participation in the society. I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Ribotta in order for him to give his comment and to make a brief presentation regarding the gender and development topic.
Sure. Just continuing from the conversation so far. I mean, fully agree with your initial thoughts and ideas. I think the argument of well, it so happens that women and girls are actually slightly more than half of the world population. So how can we even possibly imagine that we can speak about a sustainable development, globally as a planet, if we think that we could somehow sort of forget about half of the world population? I mean, I think this alone is I think it sort of helps us understand that really gender equality is an essential part of sustainable development. You were mentioning the social and economic. All of these are certainly, once again, by and large, these kind of rights in terms of equality are by and large respected and promoted and enshrined in legislation. But there is a lot of existing and let's say unequal playing field that needs to be addressed. Just a few examples. So how can we speak of? You were mentioning about participation of women in the labor market, which is obviously promoted on equal footing, et cetera, et cetera. But what if we know, for example, that when it comes to rural area, most of the women that work in agriculture are doing so totally in the dark from the formal economic sectors? How can we make sure that those women benefit from all of the social network and social protection if all the work they do remains at the level of informality? How can we make sure that women can benefit from economic progress if they're still facing a lot of challenges nowadays to actually access property rights in terms of land and productive assets, which is one of the struggles that they are still facing, because the set of laws and bylaws is such that men are almost invariably preferred to when it comes to signing land ownership contracts, so on and so forth. Another huge issue is how can we make the women's economic empowerment rights a reality if we know, for example, a recent study in Albania found out that women are on average implementing 6 to 8 times more domestic work and care than men. We all functions on a 24 hours schedule. Women do not have more time than men do. So if they have to spend 6 to 8 times more time than men taking care of their children, and they are not helped and supported with a number of, let's say, with a network of services that can help them really becoming and taking advantage of the economic opportunities, well, unfortunately, those rights that are on paper cannot be materialized, cannot be realized. So I think these are just some examples that I think help us illustrate how, in fact, sustainable development is so much characterized by addressing, let's say, deeply rooted inequalities between men and women. As you know, I think the good news is that as of 5 years now, we have a kind of a global sustainable development compact through the Sustainable Development Goals, which I know you have discussed also in previous interactions with other UN colleagues. And that's just really, I think, one key instrument that globally, regionally, and in every country can be used to really, let's say, start overcoming those differences, those different levels of opportunities. Gender equality is not only a standalone goal across the SDGs, but also touches and cuts across so many of the SDGs. And it has been proven that by focusing on specific gender-related targets and goals, you can actually realize accelerating and effects and incremental outcomes when it comes to a variety of sustainable development goals. And we can talk about it later. So just a few thoughts to begin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ribotta. So now I'll open the floor for everyone. So whoever feels like he or she has to add something on Mr. Ribotta's comment or his or her general ideas, you're welcome to speak now. So I see here that we have risen hands from Glenda and Gayla, but I think it's from the previous topic, right? Okay.
No.
So.
No, they can continue their thoughts. It's a.
Or if you want,
topic.
yes.
So, Glenda.
Okay.
The floor is up to you.
Sure, I hope I'm not drifting too far from the actual topic that we're discussing right now. But I think that if we actually want to make these changes and if we want to convince people that gender equality is an important thing in society, in its economic, political life, doesn't matter. I think that we need to be aware of what society and what people we're working with. We need to take the right steps and we need to adjust that progress to the kind of mindset they already have. For example, if we're talking about Albania, Albania is not 100% okay with gender equality. So we need to take normal measures for them to understand, for the people who do not agree, for them to understand that it is good for women and men to have the same positions in the economic life and political life. For example, if you're talking to someone who does not have the minimal knowledge of human rights and equality, they're not going to understand the most important topics after that. And I really like what Anya said before, that people here do not have a positive stance towards feminism because they have been presented with this huge wave of gender equality, maybe in the right way, maybe in the wrong way, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that the society here feels overwhelmed and they're not going to be able to understand if it's propaganda or if it's something that should be done. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Glenda. Now we give the floor to Clinthe. Clinthe?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you for the floor. This is a very interesting topic. I myself, as a guy, I don't fully understand what problems the girls actually face, and I'm sure it's. I'm sure, according to my point of view, for them maybe the discrimination at work or whatever feels like a kind of racism, because it's, I think, they get treated differently than men. They don't usually, for example, in my work, there are mostly male managers, and women managers seems to be like in the shadow, and they don't get fully to participate in many things, in many important things, decision making at work. So I wanted to get a glimpse how that feels, or I wanted to hear the women in this call about their experiences. It would be very interesting to see things in their perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kinti. So we have Joanna. Joanna, would you like to say something?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to make a very small comment on the discussion prior to this one that Anya said. I think the reason that people fear rallies and protests being political so much here is not because they don't want change to come from these political parties. It's because sometimes, not sometimes, most of the times here in Albania, political parties have used these protests for their own gain, to gain voters and stuff like that, and to convince people that they're doing the right thing, or they're only doing it for like a facade and they're not doing it because they're genuinely concerned about these issues. That's why I think that people fear things becoming political here, because political stances are supposed to represent the people, and then when they're not doing that correctly, I think that people don't want them representing something that they will not do adequately. And I also think that in the workspace, we should like accept that a lot of jobs are geared more towards men and more towards women, but that does not mean that there's a huge gap between men and women, especially in their pay. And even when taken seriously, like when women apply to job, their marriage status, and if they have children or not, their age or something, things like that just contribute so much to them being accepted to their job. So I don't have any real life experiences within work because I'm only 16 and I haven't gone into a work field, but I also have like experiences from like different places or like sessions that I've attended, like international places, where I've like really been like struck and shocked because people have not taken seriously, even though my points were very valid and supported by other males. Some males will just refuse to take my word for it because I am a female or I was like slightly younger there, but if I was there, then I deserve the spot. So I think that's an issue that concerns me sometimes, and that I feel that I'm not taking seriously just because of my gender. And it's something that I face a lot, and I hope to not to face in the future, but I have prepared myself for it, and I have taught myself how to encounter these moments and how to protect myself.
Joanna, thank you very much for your sincere remarks, actually. Now I would like to pass the floor back to Mr. Ribotta in order to give his comments regarding the three previous participants.
Okay, excellent points. Just very quickly, I think there is a lot that you are talking, when we speak about gender and development issues, there is one underlying conversation that has to do with power sharing, which I think perhaps you're not calling it that way, but I think you kind of speaking to this issue so much. So at the end of the day, it's so much have to do with power sharing and challenging the idea that in society, all aspects of society, if you look at political participation, economic participation, social participation, there is an underlying understanding that it is mostly men who should be taking the lion's share of representation and participation. Until we are able together globally, you are Albanian citizens, so you do have an expectations and perhaps also responsibility to actually run your fight for your country. Until we understand that we really have to redress this power imbalance, I think it would be extremely difficult to speak about anything else. Consider just as an example the recent let's say negotiations about the new electoral system or reform that has been going on for some time. On which basis? So on which basis? The quota, there has been, I understand, a kind of a deal and an agreement on the basis of a 30% or 33% quota system that would guarantee a minimum of 1/3 of seats in national parliament to women. On which basis you should settle, my question to you is on which premise and basis you should settle for 1/3 of participation in political life. That is something that I kind of fail to understand. And I think it also speaks to the questions of Clinty. I mean, if you look at the globally, all of the major corporations, and in terms of, you know, CEO positions in boards, it is by and large, the power is with men. Now, one of the problems with that, you know, setting the bar higher for, let's say, a 50% quota in national parliaments, practically speaking, means that you would need to have a higher proportion of men who would need to, next time around, give away power to make room for women. So it is a lot about challenging, you know, power relationship in a way that it can be shared more equal. One other consideration on which I found extremely interesting from Joanna, the reference to, well, you know, whenever we see that public demonstrations and rallies kind of become political, then it kind of, you know, it tends to actually pull people away, and especially youth away. I mean, obviously there is I think there is an underlying conversation that, you know, it's not the topic of this dialogue, about the level of youth thrust into public political institutions, which is also an interesting one. But besides that point, I think I think to me it's important to distinguish between political and politicized. To me, when you realize, because of what you see in the news, that young girls are not safe in the community where they live, young girls are not safe when they go to school, this is highly a political issue. I cannot call it otherwise than a hugely important political issues that require political answers, in the sense that it's a problem of your community that needs to be addressed, and politics is the art of understanding problems and finding solutions. Something else is when, of course, you see that you're being dragged because there is a tendency to actually divide and instrumentalize battles across political parties divides. That's obviously something that, you know, as youth movement, you should be aware of. But I wouldn't want you to somehow say, well, if I see that you know, political parties are trying to sort of steal our battles, then we have to back off, because I think that would be quite concerning, and I think it would affect also the extent to which solutions can be found.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ribotta. I'm pretty sure that your remarks tackled some new thoughts in everyone, but right now I would like to give the floor to Gayla.
So, hello again. I would like to make a relation between this topic and the previous one by using all the topics or all the other parts of our everyday life that are related to gender and development and gender and mainstreaming. On one side, we have education, which is really important, because well-educated society is in fact a society that takes into consideration development and any other sphere of the life. And I would like to divide this into schooling and also family education. It is important for us to know that there are more lessons related to gender equality, because as what we've seen till now, they are more about equality between people with different skin colors compared to the one about equality between males and females. Then we have the family education, where we should take into consideration the fact that our parents should educate us in the way that we have to respect ourselves and the others, even if they are males or females. So in another concept related to the fact that the gender doesn't really affect us in the way that it's not that important, that the fact that this person is important because he is a person, because he is facing us, and we have to respect him as a human and not as a male or as a female. And then we have the legal part, and I really think that there should be more policies related to gender equality, especially ones that are related to female empowerment and also the attendance of women into the political life. I think that politicians shouldn't use these topics, or let's say the inequality between genders, as their attention to get more votes and become superior compared to the other parties. They should take these topics into consideration in order to give them some voice, in order to not let them off the record. And if we take into consideration all these three topics, then we might have some positive consequences and effects of gender equality in our society. And then I would like to continue to the other topic related to the impact that women have in our society, especially in the economical and social development. Of course, as means they have an impact, and it would be greater if more women had the opportunity to be paid for unpaid jobs that they do, if there was a lack of professional stereotypes, and if these women had the opportunity to strengthen themselves and empower themselves. If such thing happened, of course, if it was supported by different policies and of course by the political sphere, then I think that women would have a greater, let's say, impact in our economical and social life in order to have a more sustainable and more developed world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gayla. Now, I would like to give the word to Anya. Anya, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think in our country, regarding gender development and gender mainstreaming, there is not doing a lot, like our country is not doing a lot about either of them. And also I would like to mention the fact that especially for women in marginalized communities, there is so much less doing because they have like two levels of oppression. They are from a lower class in society, so they have the oppression of being in a lower social class, and they also have the oppression of being women. So basically they live and I think there is doing and the actions like regarding and the policies regarding these women from these marginalized communities are very much less than we'd like to see and we need to see. Because for me, as I live like a considerably privileged life, I take like, yes, I experience sexism because I am a woman here living in this society, but my experience is more passive aggressive regarding it. And there are lots of more aggressive methods, and especially, and I don't think that this can be solved just with education, because you cannot educate out a mentality of people. Even it's been tried and it's been proven that it's failing slowly. So there needs, like, education is a good starting point, but it's not the only thing. It's not the only tool that we should be focusing to go to our destination. Like many of before me say, like there needs to be like concrete policies and concrete legal power in these policies for these women in marginalized communities, and especially because their voices are so drowned, like their voices are almost not heard at all because they're not even offered a platform to talk about these issues, like especially regarding issues with domestic violence, which like domestic violence is killing our women here. And every time we hear like another news outlet that, oh my God, this man killed this woman, but like there is nothing concrete doing. There is nothing concrete about this. And like even our laws are more protecting towards our men than towards our women. So this is the issue that I would like to raise regarding like gender development, especially here in this country. Like we need to talk about our marginalized communities first if we want to really we want really to step up this topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anya. Now I would like to give the floor back to Mr. Ribotta for his comments on your views.
Great comments. By the way, we've been talking together for almost over an hour, and we haven't mentioned that incidentally we are living in the middle of a huge pandemic who has completely changed our lives. And as we know, making reference to the last point on domestic violence, it has put an additional, because of the confinement measures and because of for months the inability to actually get out of our homes. I mean, the home, which is supposed to be the most, let's say, the ultimate safe haven for human beings, we know that for many women has basically put them into additional danger and higher risk because of the daily domestic violence that they are facing. So indeed, we are seeing this with great concerns. I think that Anya, what you were referring to really speaks to, there is, in the kind of development practitioners jargon, there is something that is called intersectionality, which really speaks about, and it's really about this overall idea and notion of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is so much framed around the idea of leaving no one behind, which you may have heard. So the whole idea is that at the end of the day, if sustainable development is to work, it needs to be able to reach the most vulnerable, those that are most excluded in society. And you have given excellent examples of how, in fact, there are certain groups of people that are actually affected by multiple and different forms of discriminations because of the life they live. I mean, think about, you mentioned poverty, you mentioned being a woman, but think about sexual identity or disability, or even sort of racial and ethnic sort of a belonging. All of these can actually concentrate into the same individuals, fundamentally multiplying the level of discrimination that individuals face on a daily basis. So unless this agenda is able to actually benefit those that are most at need and most vulnerable on a daily basis, it will kind of fail to produce beneficial effects for entire communities. So that's very, very interesting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ribotta. Actually, I want to thank each and everyone that gave their thoughts, not only in this topic, but generally. During these coffee talks, I'm aware that many more of you want to give their opinions regarding gender and development, but due to the limited time, we have to pass to the next topic. And of course, you can give your thoughts and opinions in there. So the next topic will be regarding men and gender. It will be more informal, and I'm pretty sure that it will be more sensitive to your heart. So I'm giving the floor to Luca. So Luca.
Yes, hi, thank you. So I wanted to start from something that Mr. Ribotta said, which is that one of the main arguments in favor of gender sensitivity in development is that if you don't do that, you forget 50% of the population. I agree, but I would argue that's even a very conservative, moderate estimate, in the sense that, in my opinion, like, if you have a gender insensitive approach, also economically, you're not only leaving behind all the women, but also many men. What do I mean by this? And I think I'm speaking now to a successful professional and also a father. If we relegate women, for instance, in home with family, dealing with their family, and we relegate men to the public life, of course, this is a very misogynistic understanding of the word, but also takes away from men the possibility to engage in their lives, to fulfill their wish to be fathers, to be engaged with their sons and their daughters. And so the idea is that at the end of the day, gender inequality has to do with the fact that you have a sort of ideal of what it means to a woman to be a man, and many women and also many women don't fit in it. So I also wanted to add a little bit of a personal funny aspect to this, because I've worked as a man in gender. It's already a year, and I met Mr. Ribotta in September at the beginning of my time in Tirana, And I have to say, I was very happy to meet him for the very own reason that
another man working on gender.
Exactly. So the point was that in the 6 months before, of course, you end up, I work in a gender unit, you end up many times to sit at tables with only women, which is a funny experience. And I think men need to feel that kind of experience that women often experience. But after a while, I developed a kind of an imposter syndrome. So it was very nice for me to see that not only other men can do this, but also a man can lead UN Women. So I also wanted to ask later on to him to develop also on this. And I wanted also to frame this a little bit connecting to what also participants have written in their application. We asked as a question whether there is a place for men in the fight for gender equality. And all of you, very fortunately, have answered that, of course, there is a place for men. But the answers were 50-50. Some said, yes, there is a place for men, but men are hesitant and reluctant to participate in this. And the other half was, yes, but men must first, before being able to do that and participate, men must first understand the effects of gender inequality on men themselves. And for me, it was funny because to me, these two answers are two sides of the same coin, meaning that to me, it seems to me as a man that men are hesitant because they do not understand what there is to gain from a liberation of gender stereotypes also from a man perspective. And I also wanted to go back to mentioning, it was mentioned before, United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 and how this also opened an entire research, because gender mainstreaming is not about opinion, it's about facts, an entire research on women, peace and security, papers about women negotiators. I've read, I think 2 days ago, an article on The Guardian saying, analyzing women leadership during this coronavirus pandemic. And basically they said that the best leaders that have handled this were Angela Merkel in Germany, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, Tsai Ing-wen in Taiwan. So the idea is that, especially for experts in the field, we're constantly confronted with all this scientific evidence that women are more compassionate, they're more rational, they're more inclusive in policymaking, they care more about the future and the environment, they're less prone to conflict and war. When you include women in conflict resolution, they last longer. So as a man, I was thinking about this now also to see what to tell you. But as a man, I thought, oh my God, like it seems as if what is left for men to be is really like aggressive, irrational animals, or at least, really bad leaders for their community. And I personally don't feel that way. So my food for thought for both Ribotta and also the others, and especially the men here in the conversation, is that, of course, this is a generalization, but isn't it true somehow that women have been forced due to the oppression that they went through? They have underwent some kind of, for the last century, a process of self-reflection, of self-leadership, of self-definition and self-affirmation of what it means to be a woman, as a counter to the image of, or the stereotype of what a patriarchal society was saying that women are. And this is an exercise that men have largely evaded. Like there is no conversation of what it means to be a man in post-patriarchy. So I was thinking, Daniel and Sabina, we thought about this last topic referring to he for she campaign, but then I thought maybe it's not the time. It was the time, 2014, for he for she campaign. Maybe now it's the time for a he for he campaign. And I would really love to see that happening. So yeah, I'm giving the floor to Mr. Ribotta and then back to our participants.
Thanks, Luca. Difficult to take it from here because you said so much, and I'm not sure what I can add before we open it up to others. Really beautiful. Thank you for that. By the way, on the E for She, the E for She is for those of you who are not familiar. It's a global campaign that was launched by UN Women a few years back, fundamentally working on the advocacy, let's say, front. Public awareness front to fundamentally, let's say, push men on a daily basis to kind of change a little bit the way that they look, their role in families, at home, to take on more share, of responsibilities. I mean, many of the issues that that Lucas touched upon. What is interesting is that we have noticed that in the past 3 months, that because of the pandemic, we have ample evidence from across countries, including in Albania, that during the confinement and the fact that everybody was stuck at home, we have actually seen quite a bit of an increase of men sharing responsibilities in terms of domestic work, in terms of care for children, which, well, you may say, yes, because they were, you know, they had no option, they were stuck at home. But I think there is still a potential positive element into it, which perhaps partially, let's say, demonstrates that all of these global campaign efforts are achieving some results. Of course, it took a pandemic to see these kind of changes, and we're all waiting for this to go. And so it is definitely possible that men will go back to old behaviors of leaving all of the housework to women. So, I mean, we cannot take these changes, and we cannot think that these changes will actually, you know, remain sustainable unless we accompany them with some additional incentives to make sure that they can last. So I think you at one point, when you referred to patriarchy, Luca, which is I'm personally not sure that we are into a post-patriarchal society. No, so that's actually a question. That's a question I want to also, you know, throw back to the group. I think that definitely I think that the conversation around men and gender cannot avoid a conversation around patriarchy and what do we want to do about this. And patriarchy fundamentally implies men privilege. And I think that we need to try and discuss and identify how can we deconstruct men privilege. We cannot always assume that men independently and automatically will actually take initiative to limit their privilege that they have had for generations and centuries. So I don't think that's going to happen very easily. So that's certainly something that you know, I look forward to hear from you. I want to, by way of closing this kind of a quick comment, I was mentioning to you earlier that we kind of, as a UN team, we drafted this piece, let's say, this reflection on the eve of these horrible crimes that took place recently. There is a passage that I want to read to you. It's very short, and it goes like that. And it's where we argue about the need for a whole societal, let's say, movement to basically say enough to this culture of abuse. So we say Albanian men and boys continue to uphold stereotype gender roles, yielding a vicious cycle of aggressiveness. As feminist writer Chimamanda Ngozi put it, she's from Nigeria, masculinity is a hard small cage and we put boys inside this cage. In parallel to helping Albanian boys realize the true men are feminists, helping girls become fully aware of their worth is crucial to fight harmful stereotypes that prevent them from realizing the full potential in adulthood. So I guess I will kind of leave these initial comments at that. I am curious to hear your opinions also about the statement that true men are feminists, and what do you think about that?
Okay,
over to you.
I will now give the floor to Fiona.
Thank you. I want to talk actually by more of a subjective point of view. As sometimes I say, being a man in Albania is sometimes harder than being a woman. Sometimes this... do you hear me?
Yes. Yes, Fiona. Can you hear us?
Okay. Okay, now yes.
Okay.
Sorry. I say that sometimes being a man in Albania, as I said before, is harder than being a woman. This is because you are expected to be the traditional kind of man. And this role says that you must use domestic violence when someone is being bad in your family. You should not cry, you should not be overwhelmed by your emotions, you should not be yourself, and you should try to be someone else. Try to adapt to the culture and the needs that the image of a man in Albania has. I see this, I see that there is progress, and there is not quite the same thing that there used to be a lot of years ago. But what worries me most is the image or the perspective that we have to include in the society marginalized groups. For example, LGBTI plus is a marginalized group that we need to work more and sensibilize people to gender issues. I don't know, I get very emotional when I talk about this because I see in my life every day that, as mentioned before in the discussions, girls are learned how to behave, but boys not. They're just saying that we're saying to them that you do not cry because you're a boy. And it is quite sad that when we talk about sexual harassment is a shame, and when we talk of sexual harassment towards boys, it's taboo. And when we talk about gender equality, is worthless most of the time. But there is, I think the best thing that we can say about our generation is that we hear the problems of each other, and we are accepting of everything, and we're open-minded to gender issues most of the time. And discussions like this are the best promoter in order to keep up with the good work. So that's all what I had to say.
Thank you, Fiona. I will now give the floor to Silvana.
Yes, thank you very much. I totally agree with what Mr. Ribotta said regarding the fact that true men are all feminists, because feminism is merely asking for equal rights and opportunities. So I think to make the whole fight of reaching gender equality even more effective, we need a correction of terms. So what does it mean to be a male? What does it mean to be a female? What is gender equality? What is feminism? What is equal rights and opportunities? What does it mean to have them only formally guaranteed in the laws and the bylaws? And what does it mean to have them practically? What is positive discrimination towards women and other categorized categories which are marginalized and do not have equal rights to others? So I do believe that gender equality is a problem of both genders. And I have the impression, like most of us, I believe, that the male population does not understand this. So when two parts are equal and they are not treated as such, it is not only the problem of the oppressed one, because it is a problem to be the oppressed one, but it is also a problem to be the oppressor, since it takes out what is human out of you. This is why I don't agree with the fact that we should have much more punitive measures, because this means that we should take out the responsibility that our education system, our spirit of implementation of laws, etc., has gone wrong. So taking individuals who commit mistakes regarding gender discrimination, putting them to jail, or acting according to very harsh punitive measures does not take out the root of the evil. And this is why I believe that one very important role here is the role of the psychologists in school, in places of work where there are boys and girls, women and men, who should actually get educated about what their rights are concerning each other, and also concerning their own identity as human beings. So I really believe that education is very important at this point, and also a legal education for women and men as well, because we cannot wait for our parents or for other people or for the government to give us our rights. If at the moment that we see an act which does not apply to gender equality rules and principles, then we should know where to take it. We see in the media all the time gender oppression, but we do not know where to write or where to make a complaint. Social media is full of gender discrimination for males and females, and only talking about this and not taking concrete action does not guarantee the effectivity of all the talks that we have with boys and with girls as well. This is what I want to say.
Thank you very much, Silvana. Before giving the floor to the next speaker, I would like to give my 2 cents on this true man. I get where it comes from and I like it a lot, but I would rather suggest free men, because I don't think that there are true men and fake men or true women and fake women. So I would like much more free men, because that's the point after all. You know? So I'd like to give the floor to Mario.
Yep, thank you. No, I would like to begin by thanking Fiona actually for what she said, and to address and to begin and say, I have yet to be, or at least I would like to think that I have yet to be in a gender equality discussion where I don't feel the need to protect myself or to defend myself, sorry. Because usually how it goes is that gender equality, it moves down to feminism, and I don't think that that's the right thing to do. By definition, you know, feminism and masculinism are opposite sides of the same coin, opposite sides basically, and you cannot say that one is right and one is wrong. Since one of them is wrong, I mean that by definition the other one has to be wrong as well. And I believe that you cannot treat gender equality like feminism. You know, you cannot say that, okay, we have to be feminist because females are much lower in their they are more discriminated, or they are more just, you know. And that's why I think that that's not the right thing to do, you know. That's not the right approach to it. Now I think that men, as it was pointed out, men often are discriminated. I mean, I would like to say, when was the last time you heard about a male nanny that you weren't worried that what's going to happen? Or like, and men, or as Fiona said, that men are often told to man up, and if you have other qualities, you face the same discrimination, you know. But that is rarely the case for discussion, and I really had hopes about this last subject when I entered this this discussion, and I'm somewhat satisfied with what I see. So thank you.
Thank you, Mario. I will let now Mr. Ribotta reply to these first 2 comments.
Okay, listen, this is really totally fascinating. Thank you all. I mean, I really love all your points and the way you explain them. I don't know, maybe I can start from the last one. Mario, I think it's, you know, it's interesting, you know, also you know, we all know that feminism has a history, okay? And I think that, I mean, I'm simplifying now, but you know, the feminist movement of the end of the 60s and the 70s fundamentally was basically saying, well, if women are what they are today, it's fundamentally the fault of men. Men are the enemies, therefore they cannot be part of the solution. So, I mean, I'm simplifying now, but I think obviously, I mean, feminism and the concept and the practice of feminism has evolved a great deal over the years. So I think, frankly, we men should stop and feel free, as Luca was suggesting, to feel intimidated by this notion that we can rally and we can join the feminism movement. Besides, if the history of mankind over the past several centuries has been characterized by male domination, it is not your fault. Let us be clear about that. So I do get it when you say, well, I feel intimidated, I feel judged, I feel like I should defend myself. But I would like to encourage you to, let's say, distinguish between the historical and societal structures and what you as an individual, as a free individual, can do to try and provide your contribution to challenge those structures. It is just not your individual fault if society nowadays is what it is, and if patriarchy still perpetuates manpower and male domination in so many respects. So that's the one thing I wanted to kind of say. And just to add one word, when I passed to going back to that short passage that I read to you, when I passed it on to my 15-year-old son, I was really curious to to see what he thought about that passage, and he had exactly the same reaction of self-defense. So you have my my full empathy on that one, but we have to try and distinguish between all of the historical and societal legacy and what we can do as individuals. Which brings me to the other point that I wanted to make is that I mean, obviously there is a whole conversation that we need to do about redefining masculinity. I guess the big question is, how can we do that? Again, going back to the idea, so perhaps sometimes we cannot necessarily rely on our parents and on the previous generations, because they themselves have been the victims of a stereotyped understanding of masculinity. So I think we have to try and find innovative ways of how we can help men and boys redefine masculinities in a way that works for them as free individuals. So whether or not, perhaps something like, I totally agree that using the educational institutions is key. And this is where those conversations should take place, together with a lot of conversation and work about sexuality education that involves both young men and women. Perhaps trying to identify and leverage and use positive models and champions, male champions in society is one way to go. Would it be sufficient? I don't know. But I think the key question is, how can you help yourselves re-challenge the existing understanding of masculinity? What does it mean to be a man nowadays?
Thank you very much. I would like now to give the floor to Christy.
Thank you, Luca. So picking up from where Mr. Ribotta left, so this idea of reflecting and thinking of what does it mean to be a man. I think it's good not to just look at the two extremes. For example, it's not like as a man I have two options: be violent and be macho, or something else. Probably sometimes we feel right in the middle, so we do not have these traits that our family or our society, cultural norms taught us, but still we don't know what to do different. And this can also be a dangerous thing, because it somehow evokes apathy and not acting. And sometimes not acting is the same thing as acting in a bad way. I think that it also has to come from a self-reflection. So each young man has to have this period of self-reflection and start thinking all those ways and narratives that he has been taught from when he was a child until now. And start questioning. I mean, the role of education is also this, to provide you to have critical thinking, to question new phenomena and old phenomena in a new light. So each one of us, a way to rediscovering this new role of man has to come from a bit of self-reflection. And it's something that also the Me Too movement has started, in the sense that now it provoked this idea that young men do not know how to behave anymore around women, because they are afraid that they're making something wrong, a wrong move, and they don't know why. because they have been wired or constructed to think or behave in a certain way. So it's gender equality needs this both reflection of men and women, but what men can do in this regard is be active. And I want to link it back to, for example, the first question, the first subtopic, gender mainstreaming and gender and development. We need to build a narrative or frame a new narrative that gender equality does not mean advantage for women and disadvantage for men. That's absolutely false. Yeah. Because I think this is when people have problems in admitting gender perspective policies against gender neutral policies, because they think if it's gender's perspective, so we are advantaging women, then there's going to be disadvantage for men. So frame it differently to make it clear for everybody. It's not like this. And one really, really simple example that you can think of, it's what the COVID-19 situation brought up. So the problem of gender-based violence was mentioned. Also the fact that many women work in agriculture, so it's one of the sectors was hit the most. And also women had to take care of children because kindergarten was closed and school were closed. So the amount of work, disproportional effect that it had on women was evident. So even recovery policies now has to have a gender perspective way of looking at it. So helping women not only to recover better, but making sure that if future crises happen, to not be in the same situation. So this is one really simple example that makes it clear why it's necessary to have gender mainstream or gender perspective policies. But on the other hand, why also where is the role of men in doing this, since men are lawmakers? In the majority, let's say, the majority of the lawmakers are men, so they have this kind of power to change, to shape the political, the institutional, also the public debate, and while doing this, also self-reflecting and finding their new role and place in a more equal society.
Thank you, Casey. Before giving the floor, I was just looking at the hours, but just try all to be concise in what I think are going to be our last interventions. I would like now to give the floor to Glenda.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
So I would like to address like pretty much what Chris said. The worrying thing about feminism these days and how some certain people portray it is that it has come to a point that men think that they will be disadvantaged from this, and that like Chris said, it's not true. That's not the point of it. But then again, I would like to address what Mario said. I think that it is very true that gender equality will be fixing some stuff for both men and women, because men have stuff that they have to deal with too that women actually don't have to do that. But either way, I think that the whole feminist movement was made because oppression exists, and it still exists nowadays, and women don't have to deal with only emotions and being attacked and stuff like that. We have to deal with crucial stuff that portray your life. With oh, sorry, just a second. Yeah, so our well-being is pretty much is not the same as men. If it was such a big deal for men, like Luca said, they would be changing it. They don't mind it. That's why they don't change it. So I don't think that men and women have the same sort of life at the moment, and they won't be having it anytime soon. Because if they wanted to change it, they'll change it.
Thank you, Glenda. I would like now, before giving the floor back to Mr. Ribotta, to give the floor to Clinty.
I think Anya also had a point.
Yeah,
from what I can see.
We still have many points.
Okay.
Clinty?
You're muted.
Yes, Clinty, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. No, I actually raised my hand earlier, and now the conversation has developed. So I think, I mean, I just wanted to know what, from the history or from the religion, you know, you don't see women that are part of it. Like we have in all of religions, we have only male prophets, or it's like you know, it's something that is I don't know where has it started, the gender equality or the problem. I just want to find out, because even from history we have queens that ruled countries, but also we have male who conquered other countries and expanded you know, their kingdoms. But one interesting thing, I mean, Queen Victoria of England did a kind of conquered the Europe by making more children and marrying them with all of the royal families. So she kind of you know, ruled the Europe in some way. So that is very smart, I think. Now seeing the men who are feminists, I think Barack Obama, I really think, I really see him as a feminist, and I think and also as a very successful leader. And also I think you can, you know, take notes from him. Also, what was the main concern of this topic? What can we do? I think it comes from self-respect. If an individual respects himself, and it's raised by his family to not oppress his feelings, or you know, be himself and treat others like he wants to be treated, there wouldn't be such problems as gender inequalities, I think. So it's not really about the, I don't want to say it's not about the gender, but I don't want to say that, but it's like, you know, it comes from oppressing, like many parents oppress their children. They taught them how to behave in some old manners. So I think that is what the problem maybe is. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Clinty, and especially the last thing you said made me think of a sentence I always remember, which is hurt men, hurt people, hurt people. So people that are hurt are people that actually hurt others. So there's also a lot of oppression that you have to do towards men, boys, in order to make sure that they will be able and willing to oppress when they become adults. I'm giving now back the floor to Mr. Ribotta.
You don't have, okay. So we going on afterwards with more, or?
I would, my opinion would be to then exhaust also the other three interventions.
Because I thought there were one or two more. Okay.
Yes, to finish with another round of three, and then we're done.
Okay. Look, I don't know that I can comment a lot. I mean, these were beautiful, all very enriching input and comments. And I want to, by the way, I want to thank, I don't want to put you on the spot, Mario, but I want to thank you again for being so honest in sharing your challenges. I think that's very important as part of this conversation. To just try and respond to Clinty, I mean, where, the comment and the question about patriarchy and where did it all start? I mean, I guess the question is, it started a long time ago. So I was, it's a whole subject of university courses, the notion of patriarchy, and I think it's been studied from very different perspectives. You were mentioning religious, for sure. There is a kind of biological, sex, perspective from understanding patriarchy. There is the cultural, the social, the religion, the psychological. Sometimes it's interesting to notice that you know, even the cultures that we today study, which go back in thousands of years, as some of the most advanced from a philosophical point of view, they were completely misogynistic. You know, I'm thinking about Aristotle, for example, which, you know, we regard as one of the highest and finest thinkers still to these days. You know, all of the Greek philosophers were basically looking at women as individuals that should be happy to be dominated by men on a daily basis and subject to manpower. Interestingly, the ancient Egyptians actually used to have a lot more of experiences and practices of already at that time of women empowerment. So I think that, you know, there are different let's say nuances, but I guess the bottom line is that it goes back many centuries, and it's obviously something that it's so hard to debunk and deconstruct. But I think that if we can at least try honestly to challenge our daily behaviors, you know, I think that would be already quite helpful. Now, on the question of you know, whether or not men can be feminists or free feminists or good feminists, that's also so difficult. I think that you know, to the extent that we can at least agree that it would be important for men to embrace the values around feminism, which is not to antagonize between men and women, but to really share the idea that we're just part of humankind, and we should be able to enjoy equal opportunities and equal rights, and fight for that kind of justice. I think that would be already something. And we as men, we know that we have to face, and you have explained it much better than I do, we have to live and face every day the expectations that society and our parents and our generations has put on us to behave according to certain models and certain stereotypes. So I think it's a constant battle. So, I mean, if you're asking me whether or not I'm a feminist, I can tell you that as a minimum, I do embrace the values, and I do try and aspire to practice the principles of feminism. Whether I manage on a daily basis, the answer is probably not, because every single day I have to fight against, you know, all of the values that have shaped the educational, societal, and cultural that I was born and grown with, that actually works against this. But to the extent that we can try and let's say challenge ourselves, challenge our beliefs and challenge our behaviors, and accept and agree to aspire for something different, I think that's already it would be already a huge contribution.
Thank you. I'm now giving the floor to Anya.
Thank you. Okay, so first I'd like to start, like, the first problem that I have with, like, the conversation that we have between men and feminism is that we expect this conversation to be easy, or at least uncomfortable. Now, what I'd like to say is that I definitely agree with Mr. Ribotta in the male privilege part. And when people first hear about privilege, they think that because we're privileged, we do not have any difficulties. So what I would like to say is that this is very wrong. Being privileged does not mean that you don't have difficulties, but you don't face some difficulties that some other people do. And in the meaning of this, I think that first we should, like, the first step to be included in this conversation, to have this conversation, is to accept the fact, like, for men to accept the fact that they have certain privileges over women. And I believe that we are not born inherently sexist, but we do live in a society that is sexist, and we are imbued with these values and these beliefs from birth. Another thing I would like to say is about, I don't believe that men have it more difficult than women, because I do not believe that our difficulties are in the same category. So we definitely, like, the issues that we face are in the same root, which is the patriarchal system and toxic masculinity, which is very harmful not only to women but also to men. But I don't believe that, like, these difficulties are the same and they should not be compared. And other things that I would like to say is that I would like for all men here to go, like, when we talk about feminism, first not discredit our thoughts, to say like, oh my god, feminism is women hating men. Like, we should not value and categorize a movement by its most extreme forms, because that's very, very dangerous and very discrediting to the real work that is done behind the movement. And secondly, I would like to say that when you say not all men, this is directly related to like male fragility. So we're not talking about all men, but if you say not all men, you're directly like thinking that it is about you. So there is something that you should unpack there if you say like not all men. And definitely, I don't agree with Luca when he said that we live in a post-patriarchal society, just as we don't live in a post-racial society. We live in a society that is very sexist, is very racist, and we should like unpack these things, and we should acknowledge that we are faced with different privileges and with different challenges. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify, maybe I expressed myself badly in English. I didn't want to say I do not believe, I believe 0% that we live in a post-patriarchal society. What I wanted to say is to live, to arrive sooner or later in this post-patriarchal society, how men will look like in this post-patriarchal society, because women are telling us how they will look in a post-patriarchal society. They're putting forward the kind of political bodies and subjects that they want to be. My point was, I'm not sure, and I think this is a hinder to the process of achieving post-patriarchy, is that men don't even know what they would look like in that world. And I think that comes a lot of the fear and the fragility that you were talking about. So I completely agree. We don't live in a post-patriarchal society. We do not live in a post-racial society. Hopefully, we will still be alive if coronavirus allows by the time that this happens. Let's see. Now I wanted to give the floor to Joanna.
Yes, thank you. Well, I have like some different topics that I want to address, and I'll try to do that as briefly as possible, knowing that there's another speaker and also we don't have much time. But I do believe that these conversations that should be held should not be held only between men and women, and especially they shouldn't have to be held like they're opposites or they're like their enemies. I think that these conversations should be held firstly in a respectful manner. Like, I've had to endure some hard conversations with people, and I've tried to do them in the most respectful manner that I can and try to teach them, even though I might disagree completely with what they're saying. I'll try to find some common ground for them to grasp what I'm saying, and maybe even let them have some more I don't want to use the word empathy for something like that, so they can come to my understanding and my point of views. I think that these conversations should also be held between men together, because especially men that like call themselves feminists, or even if they don't call themselves feminists, they just believe in the equality of societal, economical, and social between men and women. Like, these men should, like, whenever they see these behaviors being conducted by other men that don't see these views as normal, or they don't see them that like women should have these values, that I think that they should I don't know, I think they might fear that this new wave of feminism, this third wave of feminism, is like that it's like that women are superior to men, or the like men will have disadvantages from this. I think that's why so many people, so many men and women especially, shy away from this term feminism, which I believe that if you don't want to identify yourself as feminine, it's fine if you believe in the equality between sexes. And I also think that like men, something that came up earlier that I just wanted to say, that with men doing more domestic work and like seeing how like COVID brought to life so many issues that like men have to do them for themselves now, not that they're alone and stuff like that. Like, I feel so privileged that I live in a household that men are like actively doing these things all the time, and not only because of a virus or because like my mom is working or doing something like that. And I think that these conversations should be held between men, and that men shouldn't be like fear talking to other men, or like viewing as like, oh, but you're so feminine, or like, why are you protecting them, like, are you going against us? I think that these conversations, men should feel empowered to have this conversation, and they should like feel secure within themselves, even though I know that's very hard because you can get judged very easily, especially here in Albania. But I think that these conversations should also like are very fundamental to be held between men. And I also think that even like being normalizing men with, as Anya said, Fiona said way previously, that like men have to live up to this standard, especially in Albania, all over the world, but in Albania, because they're like supposed to be these macho men that are like very tough and strong and have to provide for their family. I think that people should start to normalize men with like more feminine traits, even like if they're not part of a certain community, they just are like that. I think that people should normalize that here, and I totally agreed with everything Anya said right now, that acknowledging privilege does not mean that you don't have any hardships. It just means that other hardships that women are facing don't add to your everyday struggles or everyday concerns.
Thank you very much. I wanted to have as last intervention Arsild, but he he left us. So I will.
I guess so.
Arsild, okay, you're back. Would you like to take the floor?
Yes.
Okay.
Tell a few sentences about gender equality. I believe that talking about it is enough at the moment. We don't want to be harsh on any sensitive, and then go even. I'd be reluctant to compare difficulties that any side of the gender faces, and which one is harder or which one is harsher. But I would only wanted to say that men that are feminists, basically when they go through the process, because they will whatever difficulties they will go through, discrimination in the game of transitioning to change anyone's perception. So I would say that it is enough that we talk about it, so that other men can going through the process, can find themselves in the narrative, and can be can confirm that they're on the right side of history, let's say, because reaching equality is making history. And we should keep this up and acknowledge everyone's difficulties, and we should know that we're all on the same side and we're doing a good job. That was it.
Okay, thank you, Arsild. Okay, I'm giving back the floor to Mr. Ribotta for our conclusive remarks.
Luca, thank you. I'm not sure I want to use my, whatever it is, 1 minute or 3 minutes for any conclusive remark. The only thing I would like to say is a huge thank to all of you. I think this has been really very enriching for me. So huge thank to the organizers and to each one of you for each and every one of you for participating. I guess if without wanting to steal your facilitation of the session, I am tempted to as a closing to ask everyone, let's say as a summary of these conversations on the last subtopic, if you want to use the chat, and you would be asked to identify one. Imagine you're asked about thinking of what would it look like to be a man in a post-patriarchal society, and if you can think of one trait, one attribute of being a man in a post-patriarchal society, what would you think of? I'm just kind of tempted to ask you if you want to share it on the chat. I mean, of course, if you don't want to, that's also okay. But to me, it would be, I think, an interesting way to kind of close. And I'm asking everybody. I'm not asking men. I'm asking the whole group. Okay, so I think we have some coming.
Yes.
No shame, realistic. Very nice. Free. Beautiful.
So we have, yeah.
Actual freedom, equal.
Equal.
Yeah, I like that. Showing emotions also is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah. Accepting vulnerabilities. Thank you. Very nice.
Open-minded.
I guess I would add to those, from my perspective, I would add, I think you said it all. The only one I would add is to be more confident that we can also multitask.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Maybe. We'll see.
Okay, I think from my side, I'll leave it at that. As I said, thank you very, very much. It's been really a lot of fun for me. Thank
you, Mr. Ribotta. I believe it has been very productive for everyone. I got the impression that everyone felt relaxed and could share their views and created a good communication and discussion among themselves. I believe that there were a few good ideas thrown on how our participants do perceive society and how they want to tackle gender roles and stereotypes. And I believe that if we set the example, then as in society, and luckily we have Mr. Ribotta who sets the example institutionally, and with their efforts, I believe that we can make real progress, and we can have a more optimistic and positive meeting next time if it happens. So thank you all for participating. One last thing, as you know, this coffee talk is done under the framework of the UN75 initiative, and before the coffee talk, you were requested kindly to have a piece of paper in which you will have written join UN75. If we can put up our